Mm, We will wait for 5 more minutes and start at 3:10. Okay, in case others are joining. All right, let us start today's session. So today, again, we will be summarizing week 11's content, which is mostly about how homeostasis or equilibrium levels are maintained in our body, like with respect to how all the metabolic functions and the outputs are regulated, okay, by different kinds of organs, uh, outer layer, inner glands, etc., different kinds of hormones, and what all or like glands and organs are involved in the regulation. We will go through all of that, okay, and then we will finally look at few example questions. So I will start sharing the screen. Hmm. All right. So when we talk about homeostasis, what exactly it is? Okay, it is the unchanging, not really unchanging. There's a lot of dynamics involved. However, if we look at the overall thing, suppose when we talk about any system in equilibrium, so there is exchange, or suppose when we talk about diffusion, okay, a system at equilibrium, suppose A plus B forms a product C. Okay, now if A plus B is forming a product C, or like some of the product can get dissociated into the individual reactants as well. However, but there is overall, like if we talk about like if at equilibration, sorry, at equilibrium, what happens is uh, the amount of product and the amount of reactant formed are overall getting negated. Okay, so there is no weightage on one of the, like either LHS or the RHS of the reaction. Okay, so similarly, it's not really unchanging. There's a lot of dynamics going on, but the overall, suppose if we talk about our body temperatures, right? So the body temperature is usually maintained at an optimal um, range. Okay, however, so it's not really unchanging. There's a lot of things going on inside. However, when it goes beyond that range, either too low or too high, then that becomes problematic for our bodies. Okay. So eventually, homeostasis refers to, like, it involves maintaining a relatively stable internal environment regardless of the external conditions. And it is actually a dynamic equilibrium, what I was talking about earlier, and it allows changes within narrow limits. Okay. So homeostasis is the process by which living organisms maintain a stable internal environment despite the different kinds of changes in the uh, like like in their surroundings. So it keeps the body's internal conditions like temperature, water level, blood sugar, pH, etc. balanced and constant, so the organism can function properly. So we looked at like nucleic acids, proteins individually, right? So it needs different temperature conditions, different pH conditions, etc. for their functioning. So, and those functions are what is comprising of the different kinds of metabolic reactions that drive our uh, like existence here, right? So that is what is really important. So how are those different conditions uh, regulated, or in case the conditions around us change, then how the body's internal organs and other metabolic, like how body's metabolism keeps up with that, we will be looking through the different kinds of glands and their regulation. Okay. So examples of homeostasis, like maintaining the blood pressure, maintaining the oxygen levels, uh, maintaining the body temperature, blood clotting, right? It has to clot, otherwise we will lose out blood and it can be fatal. So immune responses and inflammation. So a well-known example of homeostasis is the regulation of body temperature in humans. The average temperature is around 37 degrees, but what I was talking about in the previous slide only, that it can change during illness or due to some hormonal imbalance or some metabolic activity or in response to some environmental conditions. So but it has to maintain this optimum range. Uh, how? Because by using different kinds of mechanisms to bring the temperature back to the normal range or within the optimum range when it becomes too high or too low. Okay. So, what are the characteristics of homeostasis? It maintains an internal balance, keeps the body's internal environment stable, even when the outside environment changes. It is self regulating, it can work automatically through built in control systems. It uses feedback mechanisms, mainly depends on the negative feedback to correct for any imbalance like temperature or blood sugar changes. It is a dynamic process. We looked at homeostasis being referred to as a dynamic equilibrium where the conditions can stay within an optimum range, not at a particular like specified value. It involves multiple body systems, different organs, hormones, and different kinds of processes work together to maintain stability. And it also involves quick response to any kind of disturbances. So, the different kinds of body systems involved in maintaining homeostasis can actually detect changes and adjust body functions to restore the balance. And it is definitely essential for life, for cells and organs to function properly. So, what is the mechanism in general? It actually involves a series of feedback loops where changes in the internal environment are detected by sensors, which then trigger appropriate responses to bring the system back to its normal state. So these responses can either can either be negative feed like involve negative feedback mechanisms where the system actually acts to reverse the change that has occurred, or it can be via a positive feedback where the system is actually kind of amplifying the change, like it is actually acting in a direction where it is supporting that change and bringing further changes in order for the initial change to take effect. Okay. So we will look at it in detail uh, in the consecutive slides. So the process homeostasis involves the following step. There's a stimulus, a change occurs in the internal environment. For example, there's a rise in body temperature or a drop in blood sugar. Now, there's a sensor or a receptor where specialized cells are involved to detect these changes and send the information to the control center. Then there's this control center, which is usually the brain, also known as the integration center. It receives the information for the receptor and processes it. Then comes the effector. Uh, so these work according to the control center, whatever information was relayed by the control center, and commands were given to the effector cells to accordingly carry out the response to the signal that has been received. And then eventually comes the actual response the if upon the effector cells getting into action, so it brings the internal condition back to its normal state and hence restores the homeostasis. So if we talk about like really break it down into simpler language, it is like various homeostatic processes operate continuously in the human body to keep activities under control, but occasionally the mechanisms can fail, and when that happens, the body's toxic wastes may build up or cells may not receive everything they require for carrying out their daily activities or carrying out the necessary metabolic reactions. So, this imbalance can cause illness or even death if homeostasis is not restored. So, there are genetic, behavioral, environmental, or a combination of all these factors that can contribute to a homeostatic breakdown. Now, when we talk about the body system and homeostasis, so human body is made up of several systems that work together to maintain homeostasis. Each systems like the nervous system, the endocrine system, basically involving the hormonal secretion by glands, circulatory system, respiratory system, and digestive system. All these systems have a specific role in keeping different kinds of factors like the temperature, pH, and the fluid levels stable. And by coordinating their actions, these systems can help the body adapt to changes and function smoothly. So, all these mechanisms of homeostatic regulation must be in good working order or working conditions in order for an organism to stay healthy. Now, if we'll very briefly look at the different types of homeostatic homeostatic mechanisms going on. Suppose we read about hypothalamus earlier, which is the master gland. It actually regulates temperature and osmotic pressure inside the body. Then we have kidneys, which maintain the water balance. Blood is distributing heat throughout the body, as well as it is also, carrying out waste materials and nutrients, uh, sorry, all along the different body parts. Then we have water evaporation, which again helps in regulating the body temperature. And pancreas is there, which again regulates blood sugar. Skeletal muscles contract and can release heat. So let us look at it one by one, briefly. So the different body systems, how these are contributing in maintaining the overall homeostasis. First is the nervous system, which keeps the body in a state of homeostasis by directing various body systems. The hypothalamus, the master gland in the brain, plays the biggest role as it regulates body temperature, hunger, thirst, hormones like release and inhibition of hormone secretion, and many automatic functions like breathing and heartbeat. Then comes the endocrine system, which uses hormones to maintain balance in the body. Hormones actually help in controlling blood pressure, fluid levels, energy production, metabolism, bone growth, inflammation, and the formation of red blood cells. Then we have the skin or the integumentary system, which comprises of the sweat glands. Then the regulation or different kinds of mechanisms that take place are like blood vessel dilation, shivering of the skin, definitely sweat glands as well, which again contribute to maintaining the body's temperature. And via the surface, especially the skin surface, it also controls the equilibrium of water and other solids. Now, if we talk about the skeletal system, bones actually store minerals like calcium and phosphorus. It helps protect, not only helps, it actually protects the different vital organs and helps with movement. And then bone marrow makes blood cells, which are really important for carrying oxygen and fighting infections. Then we have the muscular system. Muscles help us breathe, digest food, and move. They also produce heat when they contract, which helps in maintaining the body temperature. The heart, a special type of muscle, pumps blood and supports all homeostatic processes. There's lymphatic system. This system is essential for preserving homeostasis because it regulates tissue fluids and blood volume. And the lymphatic system collaborates with the circulatory system's capillaries to eliminate extra fluid that might accumulate and cause swelling and edema. Edema is excess flow of fluid inside any kind of organ or any kind of organ layer. Okay, any kind of tissue. Then comes respiratory system. The respiratory system controls the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. Maintaining the right pH of the blood depends on this. Brain lowers breathing to raise the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood if in case the blood is too acidic. So bicarbonate ions are actually negatively charged, HCO3 minus. Then comes so if the amount of bicarbonate ions are increasing, eventually it will try to reduce, like, accept H plus ions, and that can eventually lower down the levels of H plus, and hence the pH increases and blood becomes less acidic. Then comes the digestive system. By removing waste products and toxins from the body and delivering nutrients, the digestive system aids in maintaining homeostasis. Also, it has vital immune system functions in eliminating germs and viruses that can enter the body via consumption of food and water. We have the urinary system. Urinary system removes nitrogenous waste, which is essential for preserving homeostasis within the body, and it manages the body's fluid and iron levels and also helps in blood pressure management. So there can be different kinds of regulation. One is intrinsic regulation or auto-regulation, which is the automatic response in a cell, tissue, or organ in response to some kind of environmental change. And there can be extrinsic regulation, where the responses are controlled by the nervous and the endocrine system. So, when we talk about the parts of homeostasis machinery, there's a stimulus that we receive, there's a sensor, there's a control center or association center which integrates the um, like sensory input and then also processes the information and gives out the output, which is affected by these effector cells, and eventually we have this response, and upon our action, there is a result, right? So there's a deviation from the set point. This error is measured by the sensor here, which can mostly are receptors that senses these changes. Then integrator or the association center compares the signal coming in to set point, usually any part of the brain. An effector is usually an organ or tissue. Response is the action or the change that occurs. And the result is whatever phenotype or genotypic changes we are seeing in response to the action carried out. Okay. So there can be negative feedback system and positive feedback system where we were seeing that any kind of change that has been brought about, if it is uh, like if the system is trying to revert the particular change, then it is negative feedback system. And if the change is getting amplified or if the change is getting supported by further reactions, etc., then that becomes a positive feedback system. Okay. So negative feedback system is actually very common. It is reversing any kind of change that was brought about. It results in fluctuations around a set point, for example, body temperature. Now, positive feedback system is actually a rare case scenario where the change is getting amplified. For example, infection in the body. During an infection in the body, right? There are those immune cells that get amplified and get stored as memory cells, right? Now, set point is the ideal normal value of a variable, okay? And error becomes the values that are still normal values, however, not the set point, okay? So there is a normal range of values or error for any homeostatic feedback system in our bodies. So if we talk about negative feedback homeostasis, it occurs when a change in one direction produces a change in the other. It is the opposite feedback system of positive feedback which is responsible for reversing the stimulus by activating exactly the opposing response or opposing effect and leads to reduced productivity of the original stimulus. So it is really important for maintaining constant internal environment. Okay. So suppose the body temperature is exceeding 37 degrees. So suddenly all the nerve cells, skin, brain, regulatory center, etc. come into play and sweat glands are activated and we eventually sweat, and evaporation actually helps in cooling our body and hence it is resetting the temperature to this. So the action was increase in temperature, but the negative feedback what it did is reducing the, I mean, not the action, the stimulus was increase in body temperature. Okay. The change was this, that it is increasing. So whatever the action was taken in response to the stimulus, that is actually kind of suppressing the change in the opposite direction. It is actually lowering the body temperature and bringing it back to the normal optimum range. So this is working in negative direction to the action that was supposed to be I mean, to the action that was supposed to, I mean, to the stimulus that was supposed to increase the temperature. So there can be other examples like pH levels in blood, hormone levels, oxygen and carbon dioxide balance, blood sugar levels, blood pressure, acid base balance, osmoregulation, calcium homeostasis, and energy balance. So, if we talk about blood glucose regulation, so in case the blood glucose is higher than normal, then suddenly the pancreatic cells, these are like a type of pancreatic cells which release secrete insulin. So the activity of these cells increases, and then it releases more insulin in the blood. Then what happens is insulin is responsible for lowering the blood glucose levels, right? So all the different body cells, glands like liver, and then adipose tissues and muscle cells come into play. And then eventually the blood glucose gets stored into, like, converted to glycogen, and thereby the levels of glucose in the blood gets reduced because that particular glucose is actually used up to produce glycogen and get stored. Okay, so eventually the blood glucose comes down to normal. So this is the stimulus, rise in blood glucose levels. These are the different kinds of sensor, integrator, and effector cells or tissues coming into action. And then finally, the response is response and the result. Finally, the response is preparing the glycogen here, where the glycogen is getting reduced, produced. And then finally, the result that we see is eventually the blood glucose levels goes down. Okay. Similarly, temperature regulation, there's an increase in body temperature. The thermoreceptors sense this change. The receptors are in the skin, and the master gland also senses this change. Um, it processes the thing, the hypothalamus or the master gland. Then the skin, blood vessels, and sweat glands come into action, and blood vessels and skin vasodilate and release heat from the surface. Sweat glands in skin release heat as sweat, and hence, finally, these are the different kinds of responses that we see. And finally, the result that we get from these kinds of action or responses is that there is a decrease in body temperature or the body temperature returns to normal. Okay. So when we talk about positive feedback homeostasis, in response to an output variation, it causes the output to vary even more in the direction of the initial deviation. The change is basically getting amplified. Okay, it promotes the change to proceed further until the removal of the stimulus. Okay, suppose these are the different examples like childbirth. So the pushing of the child's head downwards during the birth process, it induces the release of oxytocin that stimulates further contractions where it creates a pressure on the uterus. Okay, and these contractions eventually continue to stimulate the release of oxytocin until the baby is born. Okay, this is the whole cycle. Okay, head of the baby pushes against the cervix, and this actually sends the signals and releases oxytocin. Nerve impulses from cervix is transmitted to the brain. Brain then stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin is carried in the bloodstream to the uterus. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions and pushes the baby towards the cervix. And finally, this cycle goes on until the baby is born. Then we have lactation, stimulation of milk production during breastfeeding that causes further feeding and continues until the baby stops feeding. Then we have ovulation, the release of estrogen by dominant follicle inside the ovary that stimulates the release of these follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which again further stimulates the growth of the follicle. Then we have blood clotting. We looked at the blood clotting cascade, right? Earlier in the earlier slides, I think in the circulatory system part, where the activated platelets release the clotting factors, which stimulates the aggregation of more platelets at the site of injury. Then, upon fruit ripening, there's this hormone which is ethylene hormone released by ripened fruits, which further stimulates ripening of the nearby fruits. Okay. Now, if we talk about the differences between positive and negative homeostasis, positive is resulting it amplifies the output signal. Negative homeostasis, inhibition or slowing down of the signal. Like whatever the stimulus was there, it will act against it to bring down the intended change. So positive feedback strengthens the stimulus with increasing productivity. Negative feedback reduces the effect of the signal with decreasing productivity. Positive feedback is a less frequent process. Negative feedback is more common and more frequent. Positive feedback is less associated with the stability of the system. Negative feedback is actually more involved in maintaining homeostasis or stability of the system. And there are different kinds of examples here. And what can be the similarities? The two feedback systems are really important and play a major role in maintaining homeostasis in mammals. Positive and negative feedback homeostasis are both responsible for maintaining a stable environment in biological systems, either by strengthening or lowering the effects of a specific stimulus. Okay, so this is suppose the seesaw here or the balance here. Eventually, if there is weightage on any one side, finally all these things, the endocrine system, the excretory system, the nervous system, different kinds of body systems come into play to adjust this particular imbalance and bring homeostasis. So when if we talk about the endocrine system, it is the major control system for homeostasis, works mainly via negative feedback loop, and there are ductless glands which produce hormones and directly release the secretions into the blood. So initially the effects are slow, but these effects can persist for a much longer time, and they actually act on target sites or specific target organs. So different kinds of endocrine organs are like pineal gland, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, gonads, pancreas, adrenal glands, kidneys, and small intestine, etc. So, what is the mechanism of hormone action? So, there are steroid hormones which are synthesized from cholesterol, and hormones enter the cell and bind to the respective receptor. Hormone receptor complex then enters the nucleus and binds to the DNA, and DNA is then uh, accordingly signaled to synthesize proteins eventually, and these proteins again act on their target sites to effect any kind of changes at that particular region, or any kind of changes in that particular organ, or can stimulate the production of certain chemicals which eventually will again have effect on some other target site or target organ. For example, testosterone increasing sperm production. In general, if you look at it, so there are intracellular chemical signals which goes inside the cells. Receptors receive those chemical signals. Okay, and then this hormone receptor complex that was being talked about, it enters the nucleus. This is the nucleus here, which has the genome inside, and eventually this hormone receptor complex signals the DNA synthesis and corresponding mRNA synthesis. mRNA goes out, and eventually new proteins are synthesized, and proteins eventually produce a response. And what about non-steroid hormones like proteins, peptides, or amines? So in this case, in the previous case, what we saw is these steroid hormones are entering the cells and then binding to the receptor. However, in case of non-steroid hormones, these do not enter the cell. Hormone is the first messenger, and it binds to a receptor on the cell membrane here. Okay, so this is the first messenger is the non-steroid hormone which comes and binds onto the receptor on a membrane. And upon this binding actually triggers the formation of a secondary messenger or a second messenger. In this example, it has been shown like a cyclic AMP, which eventually alters the cellular activities. Okay. Now, regulation of endocrine system. There is this master gland hypothalamus, then we have the pituitary gland, we have the adenohypophysis, and all these are releasing secretions which are eventually acting upon these individual glands for them and directing them to release their own secretions. And eventually, these glands, the secretions coming out of these secretions or hormones coming out of these glands will have direct effect on the target cells. Okay. These are some of the hormones that are getting released from different endocrine glands. Okay. So we have the hypothalamus or the master gland, which communicates with anterior pituitary via hypothalamic hypophyseal portal vein. It actually dumps protein hormones, and releasing hormones stimulate hormone production in the anterior pituitary, and inhibiting hormones prevent hormone production in the anterior pituitary. If we talk about anterior pituitary, it is adenohypophysis. It is actually situated below the hypothalamus, and anterior pituitary is responsible for releasing really important hormones inside the blood. One is the thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH, adrenocorticotropic hormone or ACTH, follicle stimulating hormone in ovaries, right? FSH, luteinizing hormone LH, again ovaries, prolactin not PRL, then growth hormone GH. Okay, ovaries as in it will have effect on the ovaries and release of eggs. So this is the master gland hypothalamus, direct control of nervous system and indirect control of the regulatory hormones, direct control by direct release of hormones, indirect control by releasing regulatory hormones. Okay. So eventually we have, this is the adenohypophysis, and we also have the pituitary gland. So all these are acted upon by the hypothalamic secretion, and then eventually adenohypophysis of pituitary gland and neurohypophysis of pituitary gland. They are eventually releasing different kinds of hormones, which are maintaining like ACTH, maintaining the cortisol, glucocorticoid levels. It is acting on the adrenal gland and eventually maintaining the glucocorticoids levels, epinephrine and norepinephrine levels. Then another TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone acts on the thyroid and controls the thyroid secretions, thyroid hormones. Prolactin acts on the mammary glands and uh, controls the secretion or production and secretion of milk. And then you have the growth hormone, which acts on different kinds of bones, muscles, and other tissues. There's FSH, which can act either on males, like testis, and female ovaries, and eventually similarly follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone can have action on the secretions from testes in male reproduction system and ovaries in female reproductive system, like inhibin testosterone in males, estrogen, progesterone, and inhibin again from females. And you have melanin secreting stimulating hormone. One is melanocytes. The target cells are the melanocytes. Okay. Then you have oxytocin on males, smooth muscles in the reproductive gland, the rectus deferens and prostate. And in females, you have it acts on uterine smooth muscles and mammary glands, especially leading to contractions. Then there's ADH, which acts upon kidneys. So if we talk about posterior pituitary, which is also known as neurohypophysis, it communicates with hypothalamus and it releases two different hormones, antidiuretic hormone ADH and oxytocin. Here, that was being talked about by the neurohypophysis. This is releasing these two hormones, ADH and oxytocin. And adenohypophysis is releasing all these different organs, which is the part of a pituitary gland only. Thyroid gland. um Thyroid gland regulates basal metabolic rate via thyroxine hormone. It regulates the blood calcium levels with parathyroid gland by releasing calcitonin when blood calcium is higher. And it also helps in maintaining the basal metabolic rate. Follicular cells are there which release thyroid hormones like T3 and T4. T3 is triiodothyronine and T4 is thyroxine. These hormones increase the metabolic rate and regulate blood temperature. So this is what is happening. Hypothalamus is releasing this, and adenohypophysis is acting upon releasing hormones which act upon the thyroid gland. Homeostasis is disturbed, decreased T3 and T4 concentrations in blood or low body temperature upon upon when the thyroid glands. Maybe I can start from here, this side. So adenohypophysis is secreting hormones which is acting on the uh, thyroid gland, which eventually, so this is thyroid stimulating hormone. So this eventually the thyroid glands also have like parathyroid glands. There are thyroid follicles which releases these hormones T3 and T4, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. And eventually the homeostasis gets restored where we have increased T3 and T4 concentrations in blood, which eventually suppresses TRH and TSH production. Uh, the body temperature returns to normal and we have the homeostasis there. Again, if there is any change or any disturbance in this homeostasis, again this is triggered to release the different secretions and the cycle goes on. So what can be the different thyroid disorders? Hypothyroidism. Hypo means, we looked at it earlier also, hypo means lower. So hypothyroidism refers to low thyroid hormone levels, which leads to weight gain, lethargy or tiredness, and potential depression. We also have oversecretion of thyroid hormones or Graves' disease, which leads to hyperactivity and insomnia. Eyeballs tend to bulge out, and we have enlarged thyroid gland or goiter, which you can see like enlarged swelling in the neck of the patient. And sometimes the removal of a part of the thyroid is the usual mode of treatment in this scenario. Then you have adrenal glands, where there's adrenal cortex, the outer portion, which is responsible for releasing different kinds of glucocorticoids, mineral, like different kinds of corticoids. One is glucocorticoids or cortisol, released from the outer part of the cortex, like when the organism is under stress. It causes the tissues to increase blood glucose, increase the storage of glucose in the form of glycogen, and decrease inflammation or immune response. Then there are mineralocorticoids or aldosterone, which is again released when blood volume is low, and the blood volume is actually increased by increasing the sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion from the kidneys. And there are androgens, which are like sex hormones, okay, which act and control or regulate the secretion or release of sex hormones. Then, in case and during stress, what also happens is something called as Cushing's syndrome take place, which is higher levels of cortisols in the body. So Cushing's patients have very high glucocorticoid levels caused by adrenal or pituitary disease or an excess of glucocorticoid drugs. Cushing's patients store fat in the cells, face and midsection, and that only respond to high levels of insulin, and they have a high risk of developing diabetes. Then the adrenal glands also secrete aldosterone, which is mineralocorticoids. It regulates the blood volume. So it secretes, it is secreted by the adrenal cortex. It promotes sodium reabsorption by the kidney tubules. So sodium moves back into the blood. And if there is higher amount of solute, then eventually there's osmosis or water movement towards the region where uh, solute concentration is higher, and hence eventually the blood moves, the blood volume becomes higher. Okay. um, so this actually works via renin angiotensin mechanism, where the kidneys are involved and aldosterone is involved. Okay. Then we also have adrenal glands, uh, mostly the central nervous system, synapses directly with the adrenal medulla, which is inner to the located inner to the cortical region. Cortex is the outer part. Medulla is slightly towards the inner region. And adrenal medulla actually releases adrenaline or epinephrine and norepinephrine or noradrenaline during any flight or fight, and gives us the fight or flight mechanism. So it stimulates the use of glucose and glycogen and release of lipids from adipocytes. It increases the blood pressure and vasoconstricts blood vessels, and the stress and low blood glucose can eventually increase the epinephrine and norepinephrine levels in the body. Then we have the posterior pituitary gland and vasopressin or ADH hormone or antidiuretic hormone. Posterior pituitary releases antidiuretic hormone into the blood when the blood osmolarity is high. Okay. And the target of this particular hormone is kidneys, where it kind of instructs the kidney or leads to more reabsorption of water back inside the body to decrease blood osmolarity or increase the blood volume, and hence less urine is formed. Then we have pancreas, which has digestive. We looked at the role of pancreas in digestion. Pancreas also has endocrine functions, and the endocrine portion is the specialized set of cells called islets of Langerhans. It is composed of different types. Again, the islet of Langerhans, which are the alpha cells, which release glucagon, which helps in increasing the blood glucose levels. Beta cells release insulin, which lowers blood glucose levels, and the interplay of all these hormones helps in regulating the blood glucose levels. So insulin is stimulating glucose uptake inside the cells and lowering the blood glucose volume. Glucagon is triggering glycogen breakdown in the liver so as to get more glucose in the blood. And then we have somatostatin, which is actually inhibiting insulin and glucagon secretion. So when there's low blood glucose, or suppose when we are immediately waking up, glucagon is released into the blood. It increases the blood glucose by causing the liver to break down glycogen. Okay, so glucose was used to store or produce glycogen, right? But when we have lower blood glucose, then glycogen levels lower down and glycogen is broken down to get glucose. However, when glucose levels are high in blood, after a meal, suppose insulin is released inside the blood into the blood, and which eventually decreases blood glucose and causes the glucose to go inside the body cells, and liver cells can also store glucose as glycogen. Now if there's any problem in this particular regulatory pathway, you can have diabetes, any kind of disturbance or any kind of like problem, then we have diabetes. So now diabetes can actually be of two types, type 1 and type 2. So what happens is in type 1 is it is an autoimmune condition where the immune cells are attacking the insulin producing cells. So overall the thing is the insulin is not getting produced, but the reason can be different. One reason is the immune cells are attacking insulin producing cells, so hence the insulin levels are low and blood glucose levels are high. Or it can be type 2 diabetes where it is developing more slowly and the body is not able to produce insulin properly. The cells aren't attacked, cells are fine, but overall the production has been affected. So symptoms of this type 2 appears more gradually and sometimes isn't noticed at all until the blood glucose levels become really high. So this is again a kind of comparison, okay, between type 1 and type 2. Why is it happening? We looked at it. Type 1, where the body is no longer able to produce insulin because the immune cells are attacking the insulin producing cells. And type 2 diabetes, your body is producing insulin, but it is not enough to really, have an action and for the body to really utilize it properly. Type 1 diabetes usually develops during childhood. However, it can also develop at any age. Type 2 can develop at any age, but it is most common in adults over 45. Type 1 mostly due to genetic reasons, family history. Type 2 is due to being overweight or inactive. Family history also plays a role, or high blood pressure can also play a role. Type 1 diabetes symptoms can be blurry vision, urinating in bed, like really frequent urination, increased appetite and thirst, mood changes and irritability, being tired all the time and feeling weak, unexplained weight loss. Type 2 diabetes also has more or less the same symptoms, increased appetite and thirst. However, you will also see dark patches on armpits and neck, and definitely you will have blurry vision, the need to urinate very often, tiredness, weakness. And type 1 diabetes, no known prevention methods. The immune cells are only attacking the insulin producing cells. Type 2 diabetes can be kept under control by, incorporating a healthy lifestyle. So mostly for type 1 diabetes, insulin, like injections are given, like insulin injections are given. And type 2 diabetes, healthy living, healthy lifestyle, diet choices, exercise can actually keep it under control. And definitely in case where initially if the thing is like severe, initially the person or the patient can be kept on insulin support. Now, coming to why is excretion necessary, we looked at body glucose regulation, temperature regulation. So let's look at excretory system. Why is excretion important? In order for the cells to stay alive, they must continually take water inside and other molecules, and the cells would continue to get bigger and bigger if they only took in molecules. So they must also be expelling or exporting some molecules out of the cells, right? So these molecules may be important signaling molecules such as hormones, or they may be molecules of glucose on their way to other cells. They may be waste products of cellular metabolism that the cells need to dispose. So there can be different modes of excretion based on the type of excretory product. Like the organisms can either secrete ammonia, and this type is known as ammonotelism, and the organisms involved are called ammonotelic organism. Ureotelism, where urea is excreted out. Uricotelism, where uric acid is excreted out. Aminotelism, where amino acids are excreted out. And guanotelism, guanine nucleotides are excreted out. So, based on the nature of nitrogenous waste, like mostly aquatic animals excrete out ammonia. So, they are like ammonotelic. Then mammals, most amphibians, sharks, reptiles, and terrestrial invertebrates release urea, so they are ureotelic, and birds and most reptiles and insects, snails, release uric acid as their excretory waste. So they are called uricotelic organisms. Okay. This is again more or less the same things, different kinds of things that can get excreted out of the living organisms. Okay. So all invertebrates have kidneys. The excretory product is urea. Sorry, all vertebrates have kidneys and the product is urea. Flame cells are there in planaria, which helps in excretion. Earthworms have nephridia. Cockroaches have Malpighian tubules. And prawns have antennal glands. Okay. So this is the overall excretory system in humans. Okay. Where we have these two filtration units, kidneys, and these portions or tubules or ducts, the ureters, which eventually connects to the urinary bladder, and this is and this is again connected to the urethra from where we urinate. Okay, and if we look inside the this filtration unit, the kidney, then we have a lot of network of capillaries and ducts and tubules inside for the um, and which eventually helps in reabsorption, absorption, and excretion of solutes as well as water. So the two kidneys, so this is a bean-shaped pair that we have in our bodies. So these two kidneys in the body can receive between one like 1100 to 2000 liters of blood per day, which is about the volume of a car. And because the body has only about 5.6 liters of blood, so our blood can run through the kidneys to be cleaned about once every 4 minutes. So just imagine the efficiency of the kidneys as well as in general our body, along with the heart, because it is also pumping it in that way that it is reaching the kidneys for cleaning every 4 minutes. Now, if we talk about regulation of water levels, if the blood becomes too dilute or too concentrated with solutes, then it can interfere with normal cellular activity. So there are different names called as hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic solutions. Hypertonic is like solute concentration is high, hypotonic the concentration is low, and isotonic is the overall solute or the solvent concentrations are same in almost the same in two medium. So there is no movement of water from these two in between these two mediums, like detectable or gradient to form. It is not really detectable enough. Water is moving definitely, it's diffusing out and inside. However, there's no detectable change in the volume. The kidneys are able to regulate water concentration in the blood by removing excess water if the blood is too dilute or conserving water if it is not dilute enough. So removal of ammonia once excreted into the blood stream by the cells, ammonia is carried to the liver where it is converted from ammonia into urea, which is much less toxic. It is then carried from the liver to the kidneys where it is removed. And how urine is formed? If there is too much water in the blood, then it is removed and put in urine and we excrete it out. However, if there's not enough water in our body or in the blood, the kidneys will not remove the water. It will actually reabsorb the water from the urinary bladder. And eventually, if there is too much urea or other solutes, the kidneys will remove these excess solutes. And eventually, the water volume and solute concentrations are regulated. And kidneys normally maintain homeostasis in the blood solute concentration. So kidney functions are affected by different kinds of hormones in here in the body, which is one is antidiuretic hormone or ADH, which prevents excess water loss from kidneys. Alcohol actually inhibits the secretion of ADH, hence the urine volume is more. Aldosterone prevents excess loss of sodium and water from kidneys. Caffeine actually increases the rate of salt and water loss from kidneys. And if in case someone is having high blood pressure, then also it increases the rate of water loss from kidneys. Now, this is the skin or the integumentary system. Overall, we have this hair, then comes pores and sweat glands and ducts and different kinds of skin layers. We will go through it very briefly. So skin is an organ of the integumentary system made up of a layer of tissues that guard underlying muscles and organs. Now, as it is actually really interacting directly with the surroundings, it plays the most important role in protecting against pathogens. Its other main functions are insulation and temperature regulation, sensation and vitamin D and B synthesis. So it is considered one of the most important parts of the body. So the different layers that skin has, which is the outermost layer epidermis, with a squamous stratified epithelium having keratin with an underlying basement membrane. Epidermis actually contains no blood vessels and is nourished by diffusion from the dermis. Dermis is the immediately next layer, which lies below the epidermis, contains a number of structures, including blood vessel linings like uh, nerves, hair follicles, smooth muscles, glands, and lymphatic tissues. It consists of loose connective tissue, otherwise called areolar connective tissue. Collagen, elastin, and reticular fibers are present. Functions of the skin. Protection. Skin gives an anatomical barrier between the internal and external environment in bodily defense. There's Langerhans cells in the skin, which are actually part of the immune system. Skin has a variety of nerve endings, so it can actually sense a different kinds of stimuli like heat, cold, touch, pressure, vibration, or any kind of tissue injury. Heat regulation, we looked at it earlier also, because the skin contains a blood supply far greater than its requirements, which eventually allows precise control of energy loss by radiation, convection, and conduction. So if the blood vessels are dilated, it increases the perfusion and heat loss, whereas when the blood vessels are contracted or constricted, it greatly reduces the cutaneous blood flow and conserve heat. Okay. Mm. Next comes hair, and hair can have three different types again. The very fine lanugo hair, which are like unpigmented and covers nearly the entire body of a fetus, although most gets replaced with vellus, the next portion of the hair, by the time the baby is born. Then the vellus hair, the short downy body hair, which are also unpigmented. These hairs grow in most places of the human body, and it is present like equally on like in females and males, and make up much of the hair in children. Men actually have a smaller percentage, whereas two-thirds of females hair is vellus. And terminal hair is the fully developed hair, which is generally longer, coarser, thicker, and darker than like really pigmented than vellus hair, and is often found in regions like axillary, male beard, and the pubic area. Then comes the nails. Fingernail is an important structure. It is keratin basically, and it is overall serving two purposes. One is to protect, one is to act as a protective plate and enhance sensation of the fingertip. Protection function of the fingernail is commonly known, but sensation function is actually really important. Fingertip has many nerve endings in it, which helps to receive volumes of information about any objects that we are touching. And the nail acts as a counter force to the fingertip, providing even more sensory input when an object is touched. Then we have glands on the skin, different types. One is the sebaceous glands. Uh, they secrete an oily substance called sebum that is made up of fats or lipids and debris of dead fat producing cells. And these glands exist in humans throughout the skin except in the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. Sebum acts to protect and waterproof hair and skin and keep them from becoming dry, brittle, or cracked. It can also inhibit the growth of microbes on skin. Then we have ceruminous gland or earwax, which is yellowish, waxy, and very sticky substance secreted in the ear canal of humans and many other mammals. It again has roles in cleaning and lubricating the canal passage and also provides some protection from bacteria, fungus, and insects. So these get trapped in the sticky wax in there and can't really enter inside. So excess or impacted cerumen can press against the eardrum or occlude the external auditory canal and impair hearing, and this can be painful as well. Then we have mammary glands are in fact in the female mammal they produce milk for the sustaining for feeding the young or infants. However, mammary glands are present in both males and females. However, these are developed more in females and are able to produce milk and feed the young ones. And these are actually exocrine glands, which are enlarged and modified sweat glands. And hence, this is what is giving mammalian class the characteristic name. Okay. So functions of this integumentary system has many functions in protecting and regulating body's internal functions, protecting body's internal living tissues and organs, protection against invasion by infectious agents, protects the body from dehydration, against abrupt changes in temperature, helps in disposing waste materials, can also act as a receptor for touch, pressure, pain, heat, and cold, can also store water and fat. The differences between human and animal skin system or integumentary system, where so mostly it's there are similarities definitely, but they only differ because of skin diseases. Animals integumentary systems are different with one another because they have different body coverings depending on what class they belong to. In mammals it's either fur or hair. In birds it's feathers. In reptiles it's dry scales. Amphibians have really moist and smooth skin. Fishes have wet, slimy scales. Actually, it's moist and slimy skin also amphibians do have. And animal coverings come in a variety of colors and patterns. So these two protect the animals by helping them, camouflage or blend it with their surroundings, making them look like something else or warning others to stay away, giving off like really bad smell as in skunk. Now let's look at few of the questions. A decrease in blood calcium concentration stimulates secretion of a hormone that increases calcium levels by acting on the bones, kidneys, and intestine. So, which of the following combinations correctly explains the mechanism? So, there is a decrease in blood calcium levels, which eventually is stimulating the secretion of a hormone that induces the uh, production of calcium or release of calcium from bones, kidneys, or intestine. Okay. So what is happening here is either the hormone increases osteoblast activity and calcium deposition, hormone enhances renal excretion of calcium, hormone stimulates osteoclast activity and increases intestinal absorption, hormone suppresses vitamin D activation. So hormone is actually uh, mainly the hormone that is being talked about here is the parathyroid hormone or PTH. It is actually released when blood calcium levels are low. And so what happens? Osteoclasts are like cells in the bone, which releases calcium ions, and kidneys are instructed kind of to reduce the excretion of calcium ions. Intestines indirectly increases absorption via vitamin D activation. So this is actually a negative feedback mechanism, right? So once the calcium levels are normalizing, it comes to the optimum range, PTH secretion decreases. Now, there are two mammals which are exposed to extreme cold of two different species, species X and species Y. Species X, like upon in a cold environment under cold stress, species X increases metabolic heat production and shivering, and species Y enters torpor or reduced metabolic rate. Okay, so what is the correct interpretation? Both use identical homeostatic strategies? No. And species X shows acute regulation, species Y shows energy conserving adaptation. Species Y has better temperature regulation than species X. Species X is ectothermic. Ectothermic and endothermic are like cold-blooded and warm-blooded animals that we talk about. So we are like endothermic or warm-blooded animals. We don't change our body temperature according to the surrounding conditions. However, the ectothermic ones can actually, or cold-blooded animals can actually regulate their body temperature or change the body temperature according to their surrounding, whereas the warm-blooded ones can actually, like they have to, like us, we have to maintain the same temperature throughout, even when the environmental conditions vary or environmental temperature changes. So the correct answer is definitely both of these aren't using same homeostatic strategies. Both of these strategies are very different. Okay. So species X is actually using active thermoregulation. So it is shivering, the metabolism is increasing, and hence mainly this is to produce body heat so as to, regulate the same temperature under cold conditions. And there's species Y, which is using a strategy to reduce energy expenditure by going into torpor. And this reflects two different homeostatic approaches. One is like immediate correction and immediate regulation versus long-term conservation. So this example is also like an evidence that homeostasis is actually dynamic and context dependent, not always about maintaining strict constancy. Okay. So here it is the species Y is actually not maintaining the same temperature throughout. It is actually again adopting a very different strategy to extend or to withstand the conditions and survive under those conditions. A euryhaline fish moves from fresh water to seawater. Euryhaline means any organism which any organism is euryhaline when the organism can withstand different kinds of saline conditions. Like it's not thriving under only high saline conditions or very low saline conditions. It can withstand different kinds of salt concentrations. Okay. So a euryhaline fish moves from fresh water to seawater. Which sequence of physiological changes is most likely? Okay. Fresh water to seawater, if it is moving, then seawater is more saline, right? So eventually there will be more water loss. Okay. Like the body will tend to lose more water in seawater because the surrounding conditions are more concentrated or more like has is having less water. Okay. So the correct answer will be increased drinking, active salt secretion via gills. So what is happening in seawater? External environment is hypertonic. The salt concentration is too high. So fishes will tend to lose water and gain salts. Not really gain salts. The thing is, it will eventually lose water and the solute concentration inside the body will become higher. Okay. Now to maintain homeostasis, it will drink seawater, actively pump out salts through gills and produce small amounts of concentrated urine. So this is an example of osmoregulatory compensation. Okay. Now after a carbohydrate rich meal, blood glucose rises sharply. Which sequence best describes the homeostatic response? So there will be, if blood glucose is rising sharply, the cells, um, the pancreatic cells will actually be signaled to produce insulin, and so there will be increased insulin secretion, and the blood glucose will be taken up and will be converted to glycogen in livers and muscle cells, thereby reducing the blood glucose levels. So this is a negative feedback loop where rising glucose triggers insulin release, restoring normal blood glucose levels. Okay. A person experiences hypoventilation or reduced breathing rate. So what is the most likely homeostatic disturbance and compensation? So what is happening here is hyperventilation is actually leading to CO2 retention. Hence it is forming carbonic acid, H2CO3, and decreases decrease in blood pH is leading to acidosis or respiratory acidosis. So what are the different two ways that can be done to bring the conditions to normal? So bicarbonate or HCO3 minus ions can be kept retained inside the bodies, and excess H plus ions can be excreted. Okay, so the correct option will be increased CO2 leading to respiratory acidosis, and kidney eventually retains HCO3 minus so that the alkalinity can increase. Okay, the pH can increase. So so the different, if we talk about this example, like based on the, so there are different kinds of other systems involved definitely, but based on the options that have been given here, so there are two systems mainly involved. One is the respiratory system coordinating with the renal system. The respiratory system is actually involved with the CO2 control, and renal system is involved with the pH correction. Okay, by uh, like taking care of the H plus and bicarbonate ion concentration. A person is severely dehydrated. Which combination of the responses is most likely? Decreased secretion of antidiuretic hormone or ADH and increased urine output, increased ADH and increased water reabsorption in kidneys, decreased thirst and increased urine dilution, increased sodium excretion without hormonal regulation. If the person is severely dehydrated, the person will have increased thirst, definitely, and less urination. Okay. So what will happen is there will be increased antidiuretic hormone secretion, and water will be reabsorbed in the kidneys. So because the blood osmolarity is increasing, uh, as in the solute concentration is increasing, and hypothalamus is getting the signal to stimulate ADH release. And what is ADH doing? Or vasopressin is doing? It is increasing permeability of kidney tubules to water, enhances water reabsorption, and produces concentrated urines. Okay, so concentrated urine as in there's less water in there. It won't be getting diluted. Urination will be less or more concentrated because it has more solute. So this is again a classic homeostatic correction of fluid balance via negative feedback. So a person exposed to high environmental temperature stops sweating due to gland malfunction. So what is the most likely consequence? So what is happening here is increased heat loss via conduction or failure of evaporative cooling leading to rise in body temperature, or is there decreased metabolic heat production, or there's increased vasoconstriction in the skin. So definitely if the gland is malfunctioning, the person isn't sweating at such high temperatures, then sweating actually enables evaporative cooling. However, since it is malfunctioning, so there will be failure of evaporative cooling leading to rise in body temperature. Okay. So without sweating, heat isn't dissipating properly. Body temperature is rising, and there can be the risk of heat stroke. So again, this is a multi-coordinated mechanism in thermoregulation. So at high altitude, oxygen availability is low. So which homeostatic response is expected over time? Decreased RBC production, increased secretion of erythropoietin leading to higher RBC count. Erythropoietin is like red RBC producing hormone. Okay. Reduced breathing rate to conserve energy, decreased hemoglobin affinity for oxygen immediately. The correct option will be low oxygen triggers the kidneys to release erythropoietin, and what happens in turn is it stimulates the red blood cell production, enhances oxygen carrying capacity, and this becomes a long term homeostatic adaptation to hypoxia. So, in general, suppose people living in mountain areas are actually having higher RBC count as compared to us who are living in the plains. Okay. I mean, not us, I mean, people who are living in the plains will have comparatively higher, I'm sorry, lower, lower RBC count as well as lower adaptation to such low oxygen levels, because at high altitudes the oxygen levels are really low. So people residing in mountain regions will have more RBC count, and they have adapted with a higher RBC count as well. So that's it for today's tutorial. So we'll meet again the next Sunday with the next week's tutorial. I think week 12's tutorial, and that will be the last part. Again, I think it covers homeostasis only, but some other examples and other regulatory pathways. But and then again we will look at some questions, and so there will be questions based on like the next tutorial session we will look at questions definitely based on week 12's content, as well as some more questions based on the complete module, like all the 12 weeks things, just some example questions, okay, which might help in clearing the concepts and kind of revising the old concepts. Okay, all right, so I will end the session. That's it for today's part. Thank you for joining. I will stop presenting.